Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the truth behind a shockingly cheap, natural lawn care hack that actually works. But here's the catch, and it's a big one. It only does its magic if you understand the science and follow some pretty strict rules. You know that lawn care aisle at your local garden center, right? It's always packed with those expensive, brightly colored jugs of synthetic chemicals. But what if I told you the absolute best preventative weed killer out there isn't a chemical at all? Seriously, are you ready to ditch those harsh synthetics for a dirt-cheap powder that's been quietly keeping weeds out of American lawns for decades? All right, let's bust the biggest myth right out of the gate. The classic mix-up that literally ruins spring weekends involves that box of cornmeal sitting in your kitchen pantry. You know, the starchy stuff you use to bake cornbread? Yeah, that is completely useless for weeds. If you sprinkle that on your lawn, you're basically just setting out a lovely little buffet for ants and slugs. The real secret? It's its close cousin, corn gluten meal. This is a gritty, golden powder you find at the feed store. It packs a massive 60% protein, and let me tell you, that protein is the actual secret weapon here. So what exactly is this stuff? Well, corn gluten meal is just the natural byproduct left over after a mill extracts the starch and oil from field corn to make things like corn syrup. Because it is so heavily concentrated with that 60% protein, it's traditionally packed into bulky 50-pound sacks and sold as livestock feed, for cattle, chickens, even fish. And it usually only runs about $30 to $40 for a giant sack. So when you walk into a farm supplier, you've got to ask for it by its plain name, corn gluten meal. Don't go expecting any fancy packaging. To the person behind the counter, they're just handing you ordinary animal feed. Section 2. The happy accident. Because believe it or not, this powerful weed-stopping tool wasn't cooked up in some corporate chemical lab. It was actually discovered completely by accident. Picture this. It's 1986, and Dr. Nick Christians is a horticulture researcher at Iowa State University. He wasn't even looking for a weed killer. He was just studying a fungus that attacks golf green turf, and he happened to use corn material in his test plots. Well, he noticed something bizarre. The grass seeds in those specific plots simply failed to sprout. The seeds were right there in the soil, but they just wouldn't take hold. Now, a lot of people would have just ignored that, right? But Dr. Christians chased it down. He isolated the corn components and figured out that the weed-stopping power lived purely in the corn protein. Fast forward to 1991, and he's granted an official U.S. patent for corn gluten meal as a natural pre-emergent weed preventer. It's just a beautiful reminder that the soil is always answering questions we didn't even think to ask. Moving on to Section 3, prevention, not a cure. Let's break down the actual science of how this works, and, just as importantly, where it completely fails. The mechanism here is actually remarkably simple. Corn gluten meal contains a small family of compounds called dipeptides. Out in your yard, when a weed seed wakes up in the spring, its very first move is to push out a single, thread-thin root to anchor itself and drink water. Well, these dipeptides interrupt that exact process. They literally stop that tiny root from forming. The seed might push a pale little shoot upward, but beneath the soil, it is standing on absolutely nothing. Without a root to drink water, the seedling simply withers and dies long before you'd ever even see it. So, the absolutely crucial point here is expectation management. This stuff works beautifully on brand new seedlings, germinating crabgrass, and seeds that are literally just waking up. But it absolutely fails on mature dandelions, established taproots running a foot deep, and creeping perennials. Remember, this is a preventative measure, not a cure. It stops the next generation of seeds, but it's going to do absolutely nothing to the weeds that are already standing tall in your yard. And here is the honest truth that you definitely won't hear from a lot of those quick online lawn hacks. This powder lives and dies by the weather. University trials have shown mixed results over the years, and it's simply because out in the open garden, you cannot control the rain. This isn't some magical, foolproof eraser. It's a tool, and it requires very specific conditions to actually succeed. Which brings us to Section 4, the application playbook. These are the unforgiving, strict rules you absolutely must follow to ensure success and not waste your spring weekend. First rule, forget the calendar entirely. A date on a calendar tells you absolutely nothing about the soil in your yard. You need to apply this 1 to 2 weeks before the top layer of your soil hits 55 degrees Fahrenheit, because that is exactly when summer weeds begin to germinate. So, how do you know when that is? Just watch for the Forsythia shrubs in your neighborhood to burst into those bright yellow flowers. That is nature's exact signal that the soil is waking up, and you want your powder already down and waiting before those weed seeds even start to stir. Next up is the rate. Listen, you absolutely cannot cut corners here. You need to drop roughly 20 pounds of this powder for every 1,000 square feet of lawn. That's a heavy application. It's way more than a synthetic product would require. But if you try to spread it thin just to save a few bucks, the weed's roots won't run into enough concentrated protein to be stopped. And at that point, you've basically spread nothing at all. But here's the best part. That heavy 20-pound application rate comes with a massive hidden bonus. Remember how I said this powder is 60% protein? Well, protein is built on nitrogen, and corn gluten meal is roughly 10% pure nitrogen by weight. So, at 20 pounds per 1,000 square feet, you are quietly providing this massive, slow-feed organic fertilizer to your existing grass. Thick, well-fed grass naturally shades the bare soil and crowds out weed seeds all on its own, so it's basically a two-for-one tool. So here is the exact physical process. Step 1, spread it heavy. Step 2, water it in lightly, about a quarter inch or so, just to settle it into the topsoil and activate those compounds. And then, step 3, you wait. You need 3 to 5 completely dry days so those rootless weed seedlings actually wither. Because if a heavy, steady rain rolls in right then, they're going to get a free drink, push out new roots, and completely recover. So always, always check the forecast. To quickly summarize the playbook, apply early, about 1 to 2 weeks before peak Forsythia bloom. If you make the mistake of applying too late, after the weeds have already sprouted, that 10% nitrogen will actually fertilize your existing weeds. Nobody wants that. On the safety side, it is completely safe for dogs, kids, and earthworms. I mean, the EPA even exempted it from normal pesticide rules. But because it delivers so much nitrogen, you've got to sweep any stray powder off your driveways and sidewalks. That prevents it from washing into local storm drains and messing with aquatic ecosystems. And finally, judge your success over 2 to 3 seasons, not overnight. Section 5. Why it's a secret. If this stuff is so incredible and has been a patented scientific reality since 1991, why haven't you seen it heavily advertised at your local hardware store? Well, the answer is simply the economics of lawn care. See, synthetic chemicals are a tidy, highly profitable business. They're lightweight to ship, they're protected by modern patents, they're sold at a huge margin, and they perform exactly the same way every year, so you have to keep coming back to buy them. Corn gluten meal? It's the exact opposite. It's sold in these bulky, heavy 50-pound sacks. The patent expired a long time ago, so nobody exclusively owns it anymore. It's sold dirt cheap as animal feed. And honestly, the worst part for a corporation, it slowly puts itself out of a job. By thickening your turf year after year, your lawn eventually crowds out weeds completely on its own. Nobody is going to pay millions of dollars to advertise a cheap product that eventually makes itself unnecessary. I want to end this explainer with this profound thought. A lawn was never really won in one afternoon. It's the patient choices season after season that the soil quietly remembers. Natural weed prevention isn't some overnight chemical erasure. It is a patient partnership. So having learned all of this, it kind of makes you wonder, what other multi-million-dollar chemical industries are just one cheap farm byproduct away from total obsolescence? Something to think about. Thanks so much for learning with me today, and I'll catch you on the next explainer.